Hi there. It's Godsinger's Morning Bible Study, and it is October 4th, 2025. And today we are going to start the book of James. It's only 5 chapters, okay? That was a letter from James. We'll go to Chuck Swindoll's Insight for Living and get a really good background on it. It was the first and oldest letter in the Old Testament, the very first one ever written, okay? So it's interesting. So let's jump over here. And this is Insight for Living. I'll put the link down below. Who wrote the book? While James did not specifically identify himself as to which James he was, the author is widely thought to be James, the half-brother of Jesus. Right? James was not a follower of Jesus during his Savior's time on earth, but eventually became an apostle in the vein of Paul, as one who had seen and believed the Lord's post-resurrection. After witnessing the Lord's resurrected body, James became one of the leaders of the church at Jerusalem. Peter singled him out among the other Christians there, following Peter's miraculous release from prison. James made the deciding speech at Jerusalem Council, and Paul called James one of the pillars of the church. Okay? Where are we? As one of the chief leaders in the church at Jerusalem, James wrote from that city prior to the meeting of the Jerusalem Council, which Luke recorded in Acts 15. At that council, James, along with Peter and Paul, affirmed the decision to take the gospel message to the Gentiles. This council met in AD 49, meaning that James likely wrote this letter in AD 45 to 48. Such a significant event at the Jerusalem Council warranted comment from James as he was writing to a Jewish Christian audience. But James made no mention of Gentile Christians at all, making an early date for the letter. Most likely, in fact, it was likely the first New Testament book written, right? The first one. Okay? Yeah. Why is James so important? The book of James looks a bit like the Old Testament book of Proverbs dressed up in New Testament clothes, right? Now, I used the book of James a lot when we were going through Proverbs for 2 years, okay? Its consistent focus on practical action in the life of faith is reminiscent of the wisdom and literature of the Old Testament, encouraging God's people to act like God's people. The pages of James are filled with direct commands to pursue a life of holiness. He makes no excuses for those who do not measure up. In the mind of this early church leader, Christians evidence their faith by walking in certain ways and not others. For James, a faith that does not produce real life change is a faith that is worthless. Okay. What's the big idea? What's the big idea? In the opening of his letter, James called himself a bondservant of God, an appropriate name given the practical, servant-oriented emphasis of the book. Throughout the book, James contended that faith produces authentic deeds. In other words, if those who call themselves God's people truly belong to him, their lives will produce deeds of fruit in language and themes that sound familiar to Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. James rails against the hypocritical believer who says one thing but does another. For James, faith was no abstract position but had effects in the real world. James offered numerous practical examples to illustrate this point. Faith endures in the midst of trials, calls on God for wisdom, bridles the tongue, sets aside wickedness, visits orphans and widows, and does not play favorites. He stressed that the life of faith is comprehensive, impacting every area of our lives and driving us to truly engage in the lives of other people in the world. While James recognized that even believers stumble, right? He also knew that faith should not coexist with people who roll their eyes up at the less fortunate, ignore the plight of others, or curse those in their paths. Right? And how do we apply this? More than any other book in the New Testament, James places a spotlight on the necessity for believers to act in accordance with our faith. Right? How will your actions mirror the faith that you proclaim? This is a question that we all struggle to answer well. We would like to point to all the ways of our faith and works overlap, but too often see only gaps and crevices. As you read the letter from James, focus on these areas that he mentioned: your acts during trials, your treatment of those less fortunate, the way you speak and relate to others, and the role that money plays in how you live your life. Allow James to encourage you to do good according to faith and freedom. There you go. So right? So the very first book. We'll do a chapter a day, okay? And there's a lot of highlights in here from my study in Proverbs, okay? Okay. James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes in the dispersion. Greetings. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Okay, that's a famous memory verse. Count it all joy when you meet trials of various kinds. Right? Brothers, it'll say sisters here too. Okay. Verse 5. The 5-2-8 is highlighted. Right? And we can actually jump over to, let's go to Proverbs, which we know well. Okay. Okay. Proverbs of Solomon. Okay. To know wisdom and instruction, understand the words of insight, to receive action and wise dealing and justice and equity, to give simple knowledge and discretion. Right. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Right. And I always ask the question, how do you get knowledge? Okay. How do you get wisdom? Okay. And it always points to this, okay, from the very beginning. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. Right? Before we started reading Proverbs, we always ask the Lord for wisdom, okay? Which he will give to anyone who asks. But let him ask in faith with no doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. Okay, that's faith. Faith is being absolutely sure what you ask for, you're going to get. Okay? And if you ask for wisdom and ask in faith without doubting, you will get wisdom. Okay? Good stuff, huh? Okay, verse 9. Let the lowly brother boast in his exaltation, and the rich in his humiliation, because like a flower of the grass he will pass away. For the sun rises with its scorching heat and withers the grass. Its flower falls and its beauty perishes. So also will the rich man fade away in the midst of his pursuits. Right? That's pretty cool, right? Now, from reading Chuck Swindoll's insight, we know that, right? That, let the lowly brother boast in his exaltation, and the rich man in his humbleness, humiliation. Okay, cool. For the sun rises with a scorching heat, okay, right down in the midst of his pursuits. Okay, 12. Blessed is a man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life which God had promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. Right? That's an important verse. Okay? God tempts no one. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Okay? Then desire, when it is conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. Okay? You are being tempted by your own desires. Okay? Do not be deceived, my beloved brothers. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. Of his own will, he brought us forth by the word of truth, right? That we should be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. And that's a famous memory verse too. Every good and perfect gift is from above. Okay. Hearing and doing. Know this, my beloved brothers, that let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, right? For the anger of men does not produce the righteousness of God. Therefore put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness, and receive the meekness that in the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. Okay, there's been many studies and whole groups and Bibles on this subject, right? And it deserves to be torn apart, okay? Let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, okay? Quick to hear. When somebody's talking, you should not be formulating the answer in your head. You should be completely listening, completely focused on what they're saying. Okay? That's quick to hear and slow to speak. Okay? Wait till they're finished. Don't be. Most people today argue, they cut you off mid-sentence, which means they're not even listening to what you're saying. Okay? For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Okay? Quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. Okay? And this works. It's kind of a strange analogy, but it works best with texting. Okay? When you're texting, okay, you can't be formulating the answer while the person's talking. Okay? You have to wait till they're finished, and the text comes through. Then you read the whole text, then you formulate your answer, and you put it down. That's how live talking should work. You should not be thinking of, well, I'm going to say this and he's wrong about that. Listen to the whole statement, then formulate your answer. Slow to speak, right? Slow to anger. Don't let it anger you. You need to understand that this person feels this way. You need to validate their feeling. I understand that you feel that way. You're wrong. You don't feel that way. That's not the way it works, okay? So this is a big statement. Know this, my beloved, but let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. All right? For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Okay? And we've studied one of the main themes of Proverbs was to say only kind things, right? Be humble and say kind things. Nothing derogatory should come out of your mouth to another person. You say only kind things, right? The anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. All right. Therefore put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. Okay, good stuff. Key verse, right? You could do a whole talk on those 3 verses right there. Okay. 22, be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. Okay? You do the word, not just hear the word. Right? For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks intently at his natural face in the mirror. For he looks at himself and goes away and at once forget what he looks like, what he was like. Right? But the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and perseveres, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, he will be blessed in his doing. Right? Can you do the Bible and not just hear and read the Bible? Okay? Not as easy as you think in this world. If anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this person, religion is worthless. Religion that is pure and undefiled of God, before God of the Father, is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. Okay? Yeah, that's a key one too. Okay? Religion, you say, oh, I'm religious. If you're religious, right, you visit orphans and widows in their affliction and keep oneself unstained from the world. Right? Religion isn't following God, following stuff, doing the Bible. Okay? That's discipleship. Religion is this. Right? It's pure and undefiled before God is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction and keep oneself unstained from the world. Okay? If you don't visit orphans and widows, help out the people, you're not religious. Okay? So there you go. That's chapter 1. Good stuff in here. Okay. We're gonna keep going through this because it's, you know, sin of partiality. Faith without works is dead. Okay. Having faith is one thing, proving your faith is another thing. So we'll do that tomorrow. Okay. The book of James. It's interesting because it's the oldest book in the New Testament, the very first one written. Okay. Okay. Before everything. It's kind of cool. So there you go. Give us a like if you think about it. And we'll continue this study tomorrow. See ya.